Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Varivna Adonai Eloheinu it divrei Torah kabafinu pivcha beit Yisrael, v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeimcha beit Yisrael, kulani yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah le'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'cha banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen.
Great. Okay. So before we get started in the mission of Brura, Marco, ask your question. If you guys have a question, we're here to listen, all of you. Go for it.
Okay. So look, I just I listened to part of the show last night, load shedding and all that, and I listened to part of it this morning. So, I could have not listened to it correctly. But what I don't understand is that you've got this guy Arthur who lives in the top room of somebody else, and his flat collapses, or the structure, or the bottom structure, whatever, collapses. And then you've got the guy at the bottom who, who's also been affected, and who can help in, fixing up the top part of the structure, because it benefits him, and and obviously it's going to benefit Arthur. Now, when you listen to this Gemara, you assume that they're all independent owners. They all have their own separate ownership of these flats. Right. Then the story continues, and it says that the bottom guy says, "No, I don't want to help you. Doesn't suit me. I'll live with leaks and water and whatever else. Good luck." Okay. And then Arthur decides to go build a place and incurs expenses. And the story continues around saying that Arthur, who's now built his place, doesn't have to pay rent to the guy downstairs. So obviously now the guy downstairs is assumed to be the landlord of the whole building, or at least Arthur's part as well. So it seems very strange that a guy who is the landlord of Arthur's structure. It seems very strange that a landlord would not fix his own place up to collect rent, because he's going to be in a position where he's going to not get rent if Arthur has to now go build his own place next door or whatever else. Am I on the wrong track?
You're on the right track and slightly off, but I'll explain to you what the story is here. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah. Sorry. I hope I haven't.
No, that's no problem. At least I know you've done Chazorah. It tickles me pink there. All right, guys. So let me explain to you one thing that might help give Michael clarity. The first aspect is that you cannot think of modern laws where the laws of a lessee and a lessor are very, very complex legally. Because to a certain extent, litigation today is a complex issue in terms of the possession of property, rights to that property, usage, ownership of land versus the property itself, etc. So the difficulty, Mark, was the first thing of it is you have to look at it from a different legal perspective. I think that's the first premise that would help. So it's not like a case where the above person is necessarily a tenant and the bottom person owns the whole building, necessarily. Right. So I think if we put that aside and we have a case where you have, for example, two people, I think you got to look at it more like sectional title. The reason I'm saying more like sectional title is the bottom one doesn't have more ownership than the top one. Secondly, your structures were different. What happened is today when there's construction work, there's generally a consortium of people because of the cost of construction that pay for that construction, or an extremely, you'll have civil engineers, etc. And then from that point, they sell it either via complex units or sectional title if it's a building, their levies and their fees, etc. and that mitigates the cost. They've got what you call in Israel a Kamma 38. So Kamma 38, after was waving, is where
There's three of those.
Yeah. So what happens is the Talmud 38, they reconstruct. They basically do. See, Arthur, have I got this right? They do a facelift for the first maybe 3 floors of the building, at no cost to the owners of that building, and obviously whoever the tenants are that are renting from that particular landlord also gets the benefit. So what happens is during the construction period, they put another floor or 2 floors that they own. Pardon?
It's 2 floors normally at the top. That
Two
owner
floors
that's the
at the
penthouse. That's how they get the
Correct.
money.
So what happens is the first 3 floors, they give a facelift, and they build at no cost to the, we could say the owner of the building, the additional 2 floors. And what happens is whoever has bought those particular apartments gets benefit of a facelift. And while you're living in the Kamma, you're paying a reduced rent. And the reason you're paying a reduced rent is because you're hearing knocking and banging all the time. So your rent is virtually half. So that's what they do in Israel. So even Israel has got arrangements today that South Africa doesn't have in terms of construction. Every country's got its own different behaviors. But be that as it may, let's simplify the story, the legal story here. Is, Michael, you've got 2 owners. And what's happened together is that maybe, let's just keep it simple, is that each one bought an apartment. You've got the bottom guy that bought an apartment, which, for example, would be me. And then Arthur owns the apartment above. Let's just call it a 2-story apartment for the sake of simplicity here. Now, what happens is that we bought the apartment, but the apartments themselves have, both of them collapsed. You could call it a minor tectonic plate shift, an earthquake, rotten building materials, but Arthur and I are on the same boat, so to speak, or the same building. Now, that building has collapsed. Now, what it means is unless, as the bottom floor owner, if I fail to construct my roof,
the ceiling properly,
Arthur doesn't have the floor. Where's he going to live? So he is dependent on me in that particular case to construct first, in order that he's also got a place in which to construct. That's his foundation, my roof, or my ceiling, let me call it like that. So now Arthur comes up to me and says, look, we're both in the same predicament together. You need to build as soon as possible and you need to get a head start before me, because unfortunately we cannot build simultaneously. I cannot build if I don't have a floor, and your roof is my floor, or your ceiling is my floor. And I'm turning around and saying, well, you know what? I don't have the extra money at the moment. I'm not going to build.
I see.
In the meantime, say it's going to cost me 400,000 Rand to build, and I've got expenses, etc., and I can't get a bond. In that case, let's even talk about the time before there were bonds available. I turn around to Arthur and say, for maybe 10 grand, I'm going to rent an apartment in Hazelwood. It's just for me. I don't want to spend the 400 at the moment. Now, that leaves Arthur with a very difficult problem.
Yeah.
Because what is Arthur to do? What's he going to do?
He has to go rent. He has to go rent somewhere else, assuming he doesn't own the place.
But the thing of it is, he does. I own it, and so does Arthur. But the problem is, at this point,
why would you go rent it?
I'll tell you. Okay. So the difference is that there wasn't exactly sunlight back then. I mean, there's a guy that might have lent you money back in the time of William Shakespeare, and they'd stretch you on the rack if you didn't pay your interest payments, and Jews couldn't charge other Jews interest. But maybe the person had already maxed out in terms of the loan that they've taken. Remember, we were talking about X amount of zuz at no interest. So one of the problems is that if you had to loan from another Jew at no interest level, how many Jews want to lose their cash flow?
Yeah.
I'm saying in the law, they mentioned in Jew at no usury costs. Gav, are you still there?
I'm here.
Gavin?
Sorry.
So
Yeah,
our
sorry,
students
guys.
coming
I know
in,
you
coming
understand
out,
this.
they're disappearing, they're there, they're
Yeah.
not there, they're brushing their teeth, they're eating.
No, I'm here. Sorry.
All right, lovely to see you. So I'm saying, say a case where I need to go to Gavin for money. And Gavin needs to lend it to me interest-free because that's the law. Now, Gavin's got his own problems. He's got his own children. He's got his own family. Kevin's got his problems. Now, I don't have access to that 400,000 rand for construction. The only thing that I can do is now rent somewhere else because I've got dispensable income of maybe 10 or 15 grand a month, but I don't have the 400 grand lying there. I can't go to the non-Jewish authorities to borrow money because they'd stretch me on a rack and put a candle under my tuchas until I paid the money and pull up my fingernails without an anesthetic. So the other alternative to borrow from non-Jewish organizations, believe me, would be like going to a mafia loan shark. The Jews would lend it to you at no interest because they're not allowed to charge interest. And as a result, some of the Rabbonim were very worried because nobody wants to lose their cash flow. It's their safety net. So I'm sitting at the bottom. Arthur's at the top. Arthur's got a problem. And I'm saying to Arthur, yeah, I hear you, bud, but I don't have the extra 400K. This thing's toppled. And I don't have the cash flow. So I'm renting at Hazelwood, and I suggest you do the same. Arthur's looking at me, and he says, listen, I've got 2 kids and a wife, and my mother-in-law's coming to stay. I said, you think I need this? So he said, if you don't build it, what am I going to do? I actually need to live in a place where I'm not paying rent all the time. I've paid for my place. I've got the money put aside. Stephen Herr is here. I'm inviting him in, but I don't know if he's going to follow, but it doesn't matter. Let's just welcome him in for a second. So the reality is in that situation, there has to be a certain amount of leverage that Arthur can pull. I'll explain to you what it is now. So the thing of it is Arthur will turn around to me and say, listen, I've got a place unconstructed. I don't want to throw rent money away every month. It's really not fair. You have an obligation to do your construction. So what I'm going to do is your place would need to be built first before I can build my flooring. You need to build your ceiling. I'm going to move in your place. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Can you name your right?
Good, man. Listen, you're welcome as the daisies in spring to listen. I don't think you're going to follow because you're halfway through a discussion, but it's lovely to see you.
I pop in when I can. Yeah, I said, commitment. This is not working out there.
No, it's fine. It's lovely to see you. So I'm just going to explain to Michael we on a line of questioning about property, but you're welcome as daisies in spring. So this is the story. So the story is as follows: is Michael, Arthur's got a hell of a problem. So he comes into my place, and when we say he's unaware, I am aware. But Arthur starts to construct. He says, "I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to switch. At the moment, we've both got pieces of rubble. That's what we've got. So I'm going to live at the bottom. I'm going to fix the bottom, and in the meantime, I'm not going to pay you rent at the bottom." And the reason I'm not going to pay you rent at the bottom is where do you want me to live? So I tell you what, you want the bottom place. You can't accuse me of losing out because what do you think you're going to do? Rent this rubble out to whom? Who's going to have a collapsed building? You're saying you're losing. I'm saying you're not losing. What is there to rent? So since you're not losing and I'm benefiting, by how? What I want to do is I'm going to construct the premises. When you pay me back, I'm not going to pay you rent. Why? Because I actually want to recover my losses as far as construction is concerned, because you're not entitled to rent. Nobody else would have paid you for this piece of rubble. Okay? Rav Yehuda says something different. Rav Yehuda says, no, you're entitled to pay for rent, because had the place been constructed, you would have paid for your bond or your rent anyway. And since you would have paid for your bond or rent anyway, it's not a reason to get out of that. But there would have to be a compromise. Because if I turned around to Arthur and said, that's fine, pay me rent, I would never end up paying for the construction because I would be getting my rent at Hazel.
Sorry. The guy, Arthur's now got to build at the bottom, okay? He's got to incur expenses. So, I mean, it should be no question about him paying rent. He should never pay rent. He's incurring expenses. Unless
I tell you the argument. Just Let me explain it to you from both sides of view.
Yeah.
Okay, there are both sides of view. So the rabbis say as follows, is that there is no rent payable. And the reason why there's not rent payable is because the author has rebuilt the ground story, and he uses basically the amount owed to him as almost a sort of security deposit, which means because now he's had to be inconvenienced, I don't pay, Arthur doesn't pay me rent for the reason that the reason halachically that Arthur doesn't pay me rent is the ground floor owner I must reimburse Arthur totally, and he may not I can't deduct rent for the time that you lived on the ground floor. The reason I can't deduct rent is because at the end of the day, the place wasn't in a livable, worthy state. So in that case, Arthur's living almost like in a tama, where there's construction, etc., and I'm not entitled to deduct rent. But say once it's furnished and the place is livable, the rabbis say,
and Arthur's paid to fix it up.
Arthur's paid to fix it up. At that point, the rabbis say you still don't owe rent until the construction is paid. In other words, you're not entitled to get rent because Arthur's gone through this trauma until I pay him back for the construction.
Right.
If I'm not paying back for the construction, at that point, I may charge him rent because then the outstanding debts are paid. Rabbi Yehuda says something different. He said, look, Arthur would have paid his bond or his rent, depending if he was a tenant or a landowner in the top. So the question is that it would probably be agreed that while it was in a state of ill repute, where it wasn't rentable, he wouldn't be entitled to rent. But at the point where it was constructed, what I'm entitled to do is deduct rent off the construction. In other words, in month 8, the place is looking great. And in month 8, because the place is looking great and it's rentable, even though Arthur fixed it, I'm entitled to rent for the place, but for where it's in a decent state. It doesn't say, and obviously I have to pay for the construction charges of Arthur fixing it. But this is my problem with understanding Rav Yehuda, because I know that if Arthur had to give me rent, I would just delay in giving him back his construction money for the apartment. So I would like to one day have a chat with Rav Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda might turn around and say, listen, the rent is only payable after you pay the construction portion. You can deduct it. So 400,000 Rand is owing on the construction, and the rent is $8,000 a month from the point of it being fixed. Once I paid for the construction, he's entitled to pay for the rent deducted from the point at which he's living in a apartment that's in a reputable state where I could have got rent elsewhere.
Right.
So that's reasonable. But I don't think it would be that the rent is payable every month until the construction is paid, because otherwise, if I'm earning money every month on rent, there's no reason to have a leverage to force me to pay for the construction, and therefore Arthur is stuck with the bill. So I'd be interested how Rabbi Yehuda would.
But Arthur still has to build his own place now as well.
No, at that point, no, he's taken over the ground floor.
Okay.
The top floor, not just the help.
Okay. So it's just all right. Sorry, guys. Thanks.
No. It's an important question. Yeah.
Okay, I understand if you're the landowner, the one guy owns the bottom floor and I own the top floor, and that happens. But if you're a renter, what's your vestige? You say, "Well, go rent somewhere else in the meantime, and I'll build the building." So good thing I'm mute and it still rings.
So there's no problem there, Arthur, because if you're a renter, then clearly the place is not habitable. Arthur, you asked a question, but I know you're nervous of your wife, and I don't blame you.
It's not my wife. It's my nephew calling me. I just want to say to him I'm actually in a meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
So the reality is, if you're a tenant, there is no vested interest. You just go and rent elsewhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I don't understand.
No, because, Arthur, we're not talking about renting here. Okay. We're talking about two owners.
Okay. Okay. So I
We're
understand that.
talking
Though.
about two owners. I've
No,
already
because
bought.
you mentioned earlier that he was the owner or the renter, and I thought, well, if you're the
No,
renter,
Michael mentioned he wasn't sure if he was owner or renter. I'm saying both of them own the apartment. You own the top one, Arthur. I own the bottom.
because
The apartments have. No, let me finish, guys. The apartments have collapsed. Now you've already had an asset where you've stuck money and bought an apartment, and so did I. Now we have to pay for the construction. Whether or not there was insurance in those days, I don't know. But the point of it is you can't just walk away from a piece of land that you own.
no, I know that. I just wanted to say I understand not paying rent because you already bought the top floor. You're not paying rent anyway, or you're paying off your bond anyway, whatever it is, or you paid for it. And you spent the money to fix that floor where the other guy hasn't. He doesn't have any rights until he actually pays you back the money because you basically that's the only ransom you have for him. Otherwise, like you said, he'll take forever to pay it back.
Correct. But the difference between the rabbis and Rav Yehuda is the rabbis say, listen, the construction needs to be paid and you're withholding the bond equivalent or the rent equivalent as security to ensure that the bottom owner actually pays you back for the construction. Because if he's earning rent every month, you're never going to leverage from him to get the construction money back. But if he's losing 10 grand a month, eventually, even if he never pays for the construction money, you're living there bond or rent free. Okay?
When you're on the second floor, you were living there anyway for bond or rent free. So you had to invest.
No, you weren't. You weren't. Let me explain it to you.
When you were on the top floor, you paid for that, right?
Oh,
it was
let
yours.
me explain it to you. But everybody asks a question, but you
Okay.
don't give me
I'll listen.
a chance. So I think Arthur's question is good. So Arthur, say it slowly and then give me a chance to answer it.
I have paid my bond off. I bought the place on the top floor. The guy underneath me bought the place on the bottom floor. Okay? The roof collapses. My floor goes down. He hasn't got money to fix it. Okay? So now I take out the bond to fix it so that it's a livable place for me because it's my home and I don't want to have to go pay rent somewhere else because I already bought the place. So why must I go pay rent? He needs to pay me back the money because I took money out of my pocket. Okay? If I didn't have had the money and repaired it, like you said, it'll be a pile of rubble and nobody would be living there. And it would stay like that until he could repair it, which could be years down the line. But this way, you've done it. You've done something that he couldn't do. So why must you go pay him for the rent of the ground floor, until he pays you back because he wouldn't be able to do it anyway.
But that's what Damon's saying. He's saying only once he's paid you back for all that work that you've done on the bottom floor, and now he's entitled to rent.
Yeah, but the thing I disagree with Rav Yehuda is you bought the place, and now the guy wants to charge you rent for a place where you wouldn't have had to pay anyway. Okay, because you had already done it. He still owns it, yes, but he basically you do in a way because you've actually invested in repairing it. Okay, so let's say it costs you half his property. You still own half his property, and he can, see what.
Well, you don't legally. You don't. It's still his property.
No, but
it's his property. The problem is, if I understand it, it's still his property. This is the problem: is that you fixing it up. He pays you back. He's entitled to rent, and now you as Arthur, who's done all this lovely stuff, and you've got your money back for fixing it up and paying rent. You don't have your own place now as an owner. You just now a lessee. Is that correct, Damon?
So, okay, there's two issues I'm going to address. It's actually convoluted. It doesn't give you the right, just to, you see, I know what Arthur's issue is. Arthur's saying, what happens if you have a case where you've actually paid off your place? So you've paid off your place, you bought an apartment, you've paid it off, you don't owe a bond, you don't owe rent. Now, Arthur's talking about that. Now, all of a sudden, there's a construction issue. You can't build onto the second floor until the first floor is taken over. I refuse to fix it. Then Arthur says, fine, I've actually paid for the place. I'm not paying for rent for myself and my family in Hazelwood. I invested in this place. I've paid off my bond. So we have to construct it. You won't construct it. I'm constructing it and I'm taking over yours. But I'm not prepared to pay rent or a bond apart from construction because I finished paying what the place was worth. I've paid for my place already. So
He
now
doesn't
after
own
the
it.
argument,
He doesn't own. Okay.
let
He
me
doesn't.
just finish
Am I
my
right in saying he doesn't own the place? Then he just fixed it up.
No. So what we're saying is, I just want to answer each of your questions separately.
Okay.
So Arthur's saying is, in that case, why should Arthur pay rent on a place at any point, because he's paid off his apartment? Is that right?
Yes. The other question I wanted to ask you there is, let's say I took the bond.
Let's sort one at a
Let's
time.
stick to one question.
Okay, you stick. Okay, sort it out, and I'll get the next one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
because I also had Arthur's questions. So please carry on with that.
Okay. So the thing of it is, in that particular case, we really Rabbi Yehuda is a dissenting opinion, and we're not saying that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion doesn't count. We're saying the prevailing rabbinic opinion is that there's no rent due because it's a sort of security leverage. In other words, all I want is I want to go back to the top apartment and I want my place built. So my arrangement with Arthur's arrangement with me would be as follows. Damon, you reimburse me for the construction, and then I continue to, once you've built your roof, I can continue to construct the rest of my apartment when I got the money back, because now I've got the cash flow to build, because I sat there building your place, forcing you to do it because you wouldn't do it. So in the meantime, I'm living in your place rent-free because I'm not entitled now to have to rent somewhere else. I've bought the apartment. I've bought it. So therefore, I'm staying in your place rent-free because I'm not extending cash flow and playing Mr. Construction Worker Builder. So Arthur is correct, and that's the opinion of the rabbis. I think Rabbi Yehuda's dissenting opinion is as follows. At the point where it's constructed and it's fully furnished, and the guy then, it's at a workable point where it's rentable, you can at that point, the landlord can, or the ground floor owner can, because he owns the property and you've constructed technically his own property, he owns the title deed. He can start to charge you rent, because Rav Yehuda's saying argument is as follows. Look, it's constructed. I can rent it out from somewhere else. So listen, if you stay here, you or anybody else would have to pay me rent because it's in a beautiful state. I acknowledge you got it in that beautiful state. So what you can do is you can pay me I will pay you back the construction, but if you're staying here in a rent-worthy place, either you pay me that rent equivalent, or since you own your apartment, let me give you the construction money back so you can start to build yours, because then I need to either stay in the ground floor or rent it elsewhere to recover some of my losses, because it's habitable now. Now I'm losing money. In other words, you can't just hijack my place. In other words, I have to pay you the construction money. So I think even Rav Yehuda might agree with Arthur to say that at the point that it's habitable, the construction money has to pay back. And he has to give him a reasonable opportunity to live there while the upper floor is being built, because he can't now pay rent somewhere else. But at that point, if Arthur on the top floor takes his time because he likes the bottom place, then there's a legal case that the bottom place has me to say, listen, I can't live there now. Arthur's taken it up. I can't even rent it out and recover my money. I've got the construction money. So if he continually lives here without building up his apartment, now that I'm being prepared to reimburse in construction, at that point, there has to be rent due, because now I'm actually losing. So I think in a base din, they would assess what's good for both parties. Do you know what I'm saying? But you would be entitled to it up until a certain point.
I also agree with that in some way. Sorry,
Kevin?
Once you've paid it off, once you've paid it off, then absolutely you got to start paying rent then at that point in time.
I think that's all Yehuda's saying, is that if you're there, once it's been paid off, past a point where you could derive rent from somewhere else, or that original ground owner could move back, the person can't just stay at the bottom, hijack it and say, well, I'm happy here. He has to, at that point, come to the party also somewhat.
Well, he's got to start building, and if he doesn't start building, then it shows that he's getting comfortable downstairs. Then he must pay back.
Exactly.
If he starts building, he needs a place still to stay, and he must stay there rent-free until he's finished his top place.
Correct, and I don't think Rav Yehuda would argue with that.
Yeah, if the top place...
Yes. Gab, what were you saying?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if the top place is going to take... I think I'm going according to what Mark was saying as well, is if the top place is going to take reasonably another 6 months to finish, then it's got to be rent-free at the bottom because it's not your fault. As long as you're not procrastinating, if it's reasonable to take 6 months to build the top place because you had a penthouse before and you want a penthouse back, then that's fair to be interest-free at the bottom. It's not your fault.
Correct. So I think the court would deem what would be a reasonable construction time, because the person at the bottom couldn't turn around and say, well, I'm not going to, I could have rented it elsewhere, and now he's living there 6 months free. No, if you'd have constructed it in the beginning, it would have taken 5 months for you to construct it, and only then can the person at the top floor have a place to live, because he needs a floor while you're building your ceiling. So the reality is the court would deem what would be a reasonable time. And I think we would probably, the only thing probably Rav Yehuda is saying is that the bottom, the top owner couldn't hijack the bottom and say, I'm comfortable here, I'm never paying you rent. And then you need to owe me construction. And for the period of time until you come up with the money, because you see, what they're worried about then is that the top owner knows that the bottom one is of a poorer financial status, maybe. And the top one, maybe say, let's just put a scenario. The top one owes bond money. He owes money on a bond, right? So what happens is he's got construction money and he's accessing his bond and he's paying and he's living at the bottom. He's paid for the construction. Now he's got a place where he doesn't pay rent anymore. So he's saving 15, 20 grand a month and he's constructed it by accessing a bond, whereas the bottom guy has no cash flow and he's at the mercy of the top guy. So I think the halacha is looking at a case where the top guy is not at the mercy of the bottom and the bottom guy is not at the mercy of the top guy. Exactly as Michael has said, Arthur said, and Gavin has said, that there'd have to be reasonable timelines for construction and a reasonable amount of time given for payment arrangements. So I think it's pretty clear, guys. I think you all brought this up very validly.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't waste a lesson.
No, you made a lesson practical. What did you say, Art?
James, I actually agree with you. Once it gets to a point where his top floor is livable, okay, he should move up and let the guy not live there but rent it out, and he should collect the rent till the bond's paid on the second floor, because now he's going to get the money, not the other guy who couldn't pay for it. Once the bond's paid, the other guy can move back in. That way it's a win-win situation. It could be done like that. I'm just thinking out the box. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, these situations are very real. And unless you've got a sort of, the biggest problem in South Africa is that the court system is expensive. It's not expedient. Okay. And unfortunately, the person that wins here is not the person that's right. It's the person that has more money to play games in court, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
down to the decency of a person, basically.
Yeah. So a shame. It's a pity. I'm looking forward to Kevin actually contributing and having his laptop sound fixed up, because it would be lovely if he can participate. All right, guys, let's just learn the Mishnah. We've got 1 minute left, and I just want to sort that out. 1 second. Just give me 1 sec. I think you guys have all done well. Very, very well. I hope this loads before a minute's up.
What's this case, Damon? About owning or the argument?
Yeah, I'll explain it to you. It's like All right. So quickly, our halacha on the cup used for a mitzvah. The cup that one uses to make use of kiddush or havdalah benching must be complete. It can't be chipped or broken anywhere. It shouldn't be cracked, even if the wine can't drip out. This is in the Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah, section 183. Okay? So not only should the top of the cup contain the wine be complete, but also the base. Okay? You shouldn't use a polystyrene or dispensable cup if possible, although it's halachically permitted. Receiving with both hands, holding the strong hand. When receiving the cup for a mitzvah, one should accept it with both hands. This shows a desire to do the mitzvah. Then one should remain holding it with one's main body hand only. In other words, during the mitzvah, if you're right-handed, you hold with your right hand. So you receive with both, and then you do the bracha with your right hand if you're right-handed. So you have to raise